Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the bill now be read a second time. The Climate and Nature Bill has been 4 years in the making, and the enormous amount of support it's garnered from campaigners, trade unions, scientists, faith leaders, NGOs, businesses, and especially young people, means that it is both an honour and an enormous responsibility to set out what this bill entails, what it adds to existing law, and why I believe it addresses the most important existential challenge of our generation, the intertwined climate and nature crises. This country has signed up to various international commitments, but we still have work to do to fully connect them to real and measurable action. We need to close the ambition gap between what is needed and what is promised, and the delivery gap between what is promised and what is actually happening. And that is what this bill aims to do, because too many metrics are still heading in the wrong direction. I will give way.
Madam Chair, it's very important when we move forward, as the Honourable Lady has outlined, moving forward together. The one omission from what the Honourable Lady has said has been the National Farmers Union. Can the Honourable Lady reassure me and others in this House that the National Farmers Union, Ulster's Farmers Union in Northern Ireland, are happy and accepted to what the bill means and the proposals that will impact upon them? Thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I would be delighted to have that conversation with the NFU of Northern Ireland to reassure them on this point. As an environmental campaigner for the last 22 years, it has sometimes been easy for me to fall into doomism. Wildfires have ravaged Los Angeles, floods have devastated Valencia, and the recently elected leader of the free world is urging us to drill, baby, drill in the name of making America great again. But I don't believe that doomism is helpful. Yes, the best time to take bold action on climate and nature would have been 50 years ago, but the second best time is now. This bill is very ambitious for a private member's bill, but not ambitious enough for a climate and nature bill. And it's not trying to be. It's not pretending to be a silver bullet, but it aspires to answer the question, from where we are now, what is the right next step to take? The bill's guiding principle is that we have a duty to be good ancestors. Now that we know what we know about the impact that human activity is having on the livability of our planet, how do we strike the right balance between present and future thriving? How do we make sure that we're not stealing health, wealth and well-being from generations not yet born? While we enrich our lives, how do we ensure we don't impoverish future lives? What do we want our legacy to be? A world with a strip mine next to a rubbish tip next to a shopping mall? Or a world of clean air and drinkable rivers, regenerated soils and vibrant oceans, teeming with wildlife and alive with birdsong? As I speak these words, I'm looking around to spot my 3 young friends in the gallery, Polly, Amber and Bobby from Gloucestershire Youth Climate Group. I spoke to their group very recently and also by chance bumped into them on the train into London this morning. When I was their age, I was blissfully ignorant of the looming environmental crisis. They don't have that luxury. They and the rest of their generation will face the consequences of our choice here today. I want to be able to look into their eyes after today's debate and feel proud that this House rose to the challenge, that we did what was necessary rather than what was politically expedient, and that we pledged to protect their future. So, what is in the Climate and Nature Bill? This bill has been drafted by world-leading climate scientists, ecologists and conservationists, and aims to deliver an integrated plan to tackle the twin crises of climate and nature. It would bring massive benefits for local communities, including my constituents in the South Cotswolds, improving the air we breathe, giving us clean water to drink, swim and row in, revitalising local populations of cherished wildlife like voles, otters, kingfishers and shrews, cheaper energy bills, warmer homes, green jobs, better food and healthier lives. The bill would create a joined-up strategy for the UK to tackle these interconnected climate and nature crises together, and is the only proposed or actual piece of legislation to create that link between the UK's responses to climate change and nature loss. We cannot solve one without also tackling the other. And we risk making each crisis worse if they're tackled in silos. So the bill supports a whole-of-government approach to prevent these issues becoming siloed. Everything in nature is connected with everything else in nature. Sadly, not everything in government is connected with everything else in government, and it needs to be. Clearly, housing, transport, even health has an interrelationship with climate and nature, so we need a strategy that transcends departmental boundaries. The CAN Bill would also enshrine international commitments made by the UK into national legislation to cut emissions and to restore nature by 2030, as outlined in the Global Biodiversity Framework. The bill would bring the UK public along with this agenda via a Climate and Nature Assembly, which is key to ensuring that all voices from across our country are heard, and that workers can transition to low-carbon jobs and vulnerable communities are protected. And it provides for a fair and just transition that doesn't come at the expense of the rest of the world. For centuries, Britain prospered by exploiting resources overseas, animal, vegetable, mineral and human. The bill requires the accounting for our environmental footprint to be honest, to take into account the carbon emissions and impacts on nature that are incurred overseas in producing the goods and services that we enjoy. It is disingenuous to offshore most of our manufacturing and then congratulate ourselves for having reduced our environmental impact. Yeah. And I'm delighted to say that the bill has a long history of being supported by the party that is now in government. I trust that their ecological concern while in opposition has survived their transition into power, as they are now in a position to act on their pledges. Members on the benches opposite may try to tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, that His Majesty's government is already doing everything that is in the bill. But looking at the metrics, we are still far adrift of where we need to be. Ultimately, our future will be determined not by our strategies and intentions. Nature cares only about results. The Office for Environmental Protection published their progress report on the government's environmental improvement plan recently. It found that the government is largely off track in achieving its legal environmental commitments. Now, I acknowledge, of course, that this government has only been in power for less than 7 months, so I certainly do not hold them entirely responsible for this state of affairs. But I struggle to see how expanding our airports by approving 2 new runways is going to help them get back on track. The OEP assessment shows that on their current trajectory, the government will meet only 4 of its 40 environmental targets. The State of Nature Report 2023 showed that nearly 1 in 6 species are at risk of being lost from Great Britain, and the UK now has less than half its biodiversity remaining. Out of the wildlife habitats assessed, only 1 in 7 were found to be in good condition. Only 1 in 14 woodlands and a quarter of peatlands were in good ecological state. None of the seafloor around the UK was in good condition. Just 44% of woodland is sustainably managed, and only half of fish stocks are sustainably harvested. So, in my view, the government needs to prioritise 3 things. Firstly, support for nature-friendly farming. Around 70% of land in England is used for agriculture. Supporting farmers to manage their land in a nature-friendly way will deliver significant environmental improvement at scale. DEFRA's own evidence... Yes, I will give way.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way. The key stewards of our landscape for hundreds of years, are our farmers, and no one has done more to make our countryside as beautiful as it is today, and no one has a bigger stake in protecting its health for the future. Would the Honourable Member agree that the path to net zero and sustainable local food production lies through our farming community with the support provided by this bill? Or to use a kind of farming analogy, if we're going to get the best from our farmers, it's time to use rather more carrots and fewer sticks.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention and wholeheartedly agree. DEFRA's evidence reports show that nature-friendly farming schemes can be a major pathway for first halting and then reversing the decline in species abundance, as well as delivering the majority of habitat creation needed to meet the UK's government nature and climate targets.
Would you give way?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She's making a very powerful speech, and I congratulate her on bringing forward this important piece of legislation. Many farms in Glastonbury and Somerton, like Camel Hill Farm in Sparkford, whose focus on regenerative farming has improved soil quality and nature loss across the farm. But, however, the farming budget has seen a real terms funding cut after inflation since 2007, leaving reduced support of farmers trying to restore nature and reducing their agriculture.
Order! If we're going to get members in today, and we can all see how many are here, then interventions will have to be short, not pre-prepared speeches. There's plenty of time for those who have put their names down to speak rather than use up the honourable member's time in her opening. Dr. Ros Savage.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention and applaud her for her work as an effective spokesperson on behalf of the farming community. Beg your pardon. In fact, my honourable colleague preempted what I was about to say. Farmers should be properly rewarded for restoring soils, planting hedgerows and reducing pesticide use, with an expanded nature-friendly farming budget at the upcoming comprehensive spending review. And they need a clear long-term strategy from the government so they are able to plan and invest accordingly. I will give way.
Honourable Lady for giving way, and I commend her for bringing this bill forward. Does she recognise that the Sustainable Farming Initiative is actually moving to rewarding farmers more down at the bottom of the scale rather than at the high end of the scale as we would wish to see, and that to reward farmers for rotation of crops, for example, does seem to be going back to the 18th century rather than making sure that it's the high level of stewardship that is being put forward?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. My understanding as a non-farmer is that actually crop rotation is a very effective way to regenerate soils. So, okay, thank you. The second priority is to create more joined-up space for nature on land. Through the Global Biodiversity Framework, the government has committed to protect 30% of land and sea for nature by 2030. With less than 5 years to meet this target, a Wildlife and Countryside Link report says that the amount of land in England effectively protected for nature has fallen to less than 3%. The government should put 30 by 30 at the heart of upcoming planning reforms to ensure that all development is playing an active role in nature recovery and expand the protected sites network by designating more significant and rare natural habitats such as ancient woodlands and chalk streams. And thirdly, Madam Deputy Speaker, urgency of delivery. The urgency with which positive actions are being implemented is lacking. The OEP states that the current rate of tree planting needs to substantially increase to achieve woodland creation goals. Meanwhile, major initiatives such as the UK Chemical Strategy, a land use framework, and the National Action Plan on the Sustainable Use of Pesticides, as well as the ban on the sale of horticultural peat and the reintroduction of species such as the beaver, are delayed and long awaited. I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Labour for giving way, and let me say a big thank you to her for an excellent and very passionate speech. And I can see this is clearly something that she is very passionate about and has been passionate about for a long period of time. Would she agree with me that tree planting is hugely important? Our trees are actually part of our biodiversity, but they give life to us, and actually celebrate the work that Harlow Council did in planting 5,000 trees across Harlow.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention and applaud the fantastic work being done in Harlow to increase the number of trees, which are indeed life-enhancing and valuable self-contained ecosystems. Thank you.
Will the honourable lady give way?
I will give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable lady, and I'm also grateful to her for having engaged with me about her bill and shared with me the frustration she's had in discussing the contents of her bill with the government. Can we get to the key issue here? She talks about urgency. Is it true that the government is intent on kicking this bill into the long grass because they don't really want to be seen to be opposing it, but they don't really support it?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. That is not my interpretation of the government's position. And we have had some fruitful conversations. I shall move on briefly to climate. While two sectors in climate, power and greenhouse gas removals, are on course to meet or even exceed the required emissions reductions, significant challenges remain in agriculture and land use, transport and heat and building. I will give way.
I'm very grateful. Some have queried the urgency or indeed the need to reduce emissions from fossil fuels, but would my honourable friend not agree that with 250 people estimated to die early in Somerset alone, according to Public Health England, from air pollution, there are other reasons, as well as carbon emissions, why we urgently need to reduce emissions?
I thank my honourable colleague for his intervention and wholeheartedly agree that we cannot go wrong by moving away from fossil fuels, with the implications for air quality as well as for climate. So I would call on the government to commit significant additional funding to support farmers in environmental delivery on the least productive land in agriculture. Transport has the biggest gap of all sectors between confirmed policy and the emissions reductions needed. We need to improve public transport, reduce bus fares, and increase provision for walking and cycling, and decarbonise the freight sector. Thirdly, much more needs to be done on buildings and clean heat. The Chancellor pledged an initial £3.4 billion in the 2024 budget towards household energy efficiency and heat decarbonisation. But the current Warm Homes Plan falls short of the pace and scale needed. A strong future home standard needs to be introduced this year, mandating technologies like solar photovoltaic, as per the Sunshine Bill, brought to this House by my Gloucestershire neighbour and colleague, the Honourable Gentleman for Cheltenham. I will give way.
Thank you so much for giving way, and I also commend you for what you were doing on the bill. In terms of housing and properties in the future, we often focus on the energy, but in terms of water in particular, would you also agree with me that it's important to focus on rainwater harvesting and what can be done in that sense too?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention and very much agree that it is the right thing to do. To be much more intelligent of our use in water, which both reduces the demand for clean water and also reduces the amount of runoff in increasingly heavy rainfalls as climate change kicks in. But for me, the most significant addition that this bill makes to the existing strategy is its joined-up approach. Out of the words in the title of the bill, the Climate and Nature Bill, maybe the most important word is and. Many people are aware that a changing climate is damaging nature. The wildfires in California this year have claimed millions of trees and thousands of homes. We see expanding deserts, we see melting ice caps, we see British moorlands on fire. We see natural cycles getting out of sync, so newly hatched birds, insects and amphibians no longer find their favourite foods available at the time that they need them. But what we're less aware of is how the loss of nature, cutting down forests, the warming of the oceans, intensive agriculture affects climate. This is a two-way relationship. Forests, oceans and soils are some of our most effective allies for natural carbon capture and sequestration. A healthy soil, along with trees, re-wiggled rivers and water meadows, also help to mitigate flooding and runoff, which are on the increase with ever more intense rainfall. But nature's ability to perform this moderating role and regulate climate is being compromised by the rate at which we're destroying it. We're damaging nature's capacity to self-regulate by killing and reducing and polluting and compromising natural ecosystems. Activities like deep-sea mining threaten to make extinct species we haven't even discovered yet, species that we may one day find to be enormously useful to humanity. We often hear that the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. Nature-depleted is a rather sterile phrase. What does it actually mean? Many of the alarming stats on nature use 1970 as a baseline, just a couple of years after I was born. I remember a time when if we put bread out on the back lawn, within a minute there would be dozens of starlings squabbling over the crusts. I can't even remember the last time I saw a starling. Heading off on holidays in my father's Triumph 1200, we would have to stop while he cleaned squashed insects off the windscreen. We don't have to do that anymore. We often saw hedgehogs, mostly squashed on the road, because it turns out a fear response of curling up in a ball isn't really all that effective when the threat's an oncoming car. But I asked the House, and you, Madam Deputy Speaker, when did you last see a hedgehog? And the collapse in hedgehog populations is not entirely due to roadkill. They lost their habitats, their sources of food, their ability to range and forage as woodlands were cut down and urban gardens were fenced in. If the first half, or maybe two-thirds on a less optimistic estimate, of my life has seen such huge damage inflicted on our natural world, I hope that in the rest of my life I will see nature put well back on the path to recovery. One of my team members is expecting a baby in May, and I would like to commit to Poppy's future daughter that by the time she's 5 years old, we will have halted the degradation of nature and at least 30% of land and coastal waters will be protected. And I'd like to promise that unborn little girl that by the time she's 25, we will have reversed nature loss and will be living in harmony with nature as stated in the Global Biodiversity Framework.
Will the Honourable Member give way?
I will give way.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way and for her truly impassioned speech. Thank you on behalf of these benches for your work on this bill. Chichester Harbour has lost 58% of its salt marsh since 1946, which is the equivalent of 3 football pitches every year. Does the Honourable Member agree that this needs to stop, not yesterday, but today, to make sure that it's protected for future generations to come, because it's a national landscape and a scientific site of special interest as well?
I thank my honourable colleague for her intervention. I know Chichester Harbour well, and I absolutely agree with her that this is vital work. There is hope. Nature is enormously resilient and has an amazing capacity to regenerate when we give it a chance. The RSPB's appropriately named Hope Farm has demonstrated that food production can coexist with benefits to wildlife. Breeding bird populations there increased by 177% over a 12-year period. And we need to encourage people to get involved, a new kind of land army working together for nature. We need to unlock that local knowledge, energy and passion for nature that I see every day in my constituency of the South Cotswolds, and as I'm sure every other honourable member here has also seen, regardless of whether their constituency be rural or urban. One of my especially passionate constituents, Jonathan Whitaker, put together the Shroud for Nature, an art piece made of 13 double bed sheets covered with heartfelt messages about the Climate and Nature Bill. I've chosen a few of the messages from this piece to read out today. Care for the planet, not just for this generation, but the next ones. It's your responsibility to make sure I have a home. I am 12 years old. We all come from nature. By destroying it, we are destroying ourselves. When will those in power listen and commit? No nature, no us. What you do today will change my life forever. That's from William, 10 years old. We have the solutions, we have the skill. Are we willing to make the change? Leave politics aside, make changes for humankind. And now we have a little poem dedicated to the Secretary of State for DEFRA. The Secretary of State, Steve Reed, do us a good deed.
I appreciate the Honourable Lady's quoting from a poem, but we don't refer to... when I'm on my feet, please sit. We don't refer to Honourable and Right Honourable members by name in the Chamber. I appreciate she's quoting from a poem, but please can we make sure that the courtesy of the House are observed? It's not going to rhyme. It won't rhyme.
I thank you. As the poem will no longer rhyme. I shall move on to the second half of the poem. Make the powers pay and make the waters clean for our play. And I better skip the next quote as well, as it refers to the Prime Minister rather too directly. I hope that the next line is not going to get me into further trouble. We blooming elected you, listen to us. And to end on a more positive note, you have a chance to do something important and good, so please do it. Back on safer ground. In conclusion, I'd like to share a few words about why this bill matters so much to me personally. After I had my environmental wake-up call 22 years ago, I wanted to find a way to draw attention to my environmental message. And for reasons best known to myself, it seemed like a good idea at the time to embark on a series of massive ocean crossings alone in a rowboat, using my expeditions as a campaigning platform, getting my message across through blogs, social media, podcasts, talks and books. So for 7 years, I rowed solo across 3 oceans, the Atlantic, Pacific and Indian. At the risk of stating the obvious, it was really, really hard. Spending up to 5 months alone at sea, rowing for 12 hours a day. And what really kept me going was my sense that our environmental crisis is literally the most important issue on the face of the planet. I learned a lot on the ocean, and I'd like to share 3 of those insights that seem relevant here. First, the Earth is surprisingly small. I managed to row across a large portion of it at something less than walking speed in just 520 days and nights. Yet this small blue dot is now having to support 8 billion of us and our ever-increasingly materialistic lifestyle, with all the extraction, pollution and waste that entails. Secondly, nature is incredibly powerful. There is nothing quite like being alone in a 7-metre rowboat in the middle of a storm to make this point very apparent. We might think we have nature tamed, but we don't. The recent wildfires, floods and other not-so-natural disasters have made that very apparent. Even movie star wealth has not been enough to save homes from the flames. As a species, we've only been on this earth for the blink of an eye, but we've transformed it out of all recognition. We've gobbled our way through its resources in a way that is by any definition unsustainable. There are laws of humans and there are laws of nature. Whether or not this bill makes it into human law, for sure the laws of nature will ultimately prevail. And thirdly, on my journeys, I saw the human face of climate change. When I stopped at the Republic of Kiribati on my way across the Pacific, I had lengthy conversations with the President. With only one point of land more than 6 feet above sea level, his island nation is in existential risk. Later that same year, I saw him at the COP15 in Copenhagen, just as the talks had fallen apart. Even now, we are still not on track to save the Republic of Kiribati. 15 years later, how would we feel if our island nation, where we'd been born, grown up, and where our ancestors were buried, was about to disappear beneath the waves? So this bill is about more than targets and strategies. It is a covenant with the natural world and with future generations. It is our promise to threatened species like the turtle dove, the hazel dormouse, and the red squirrel, to the black poplar, the paperbark maple, and the star magnolia, to the European eel, the Atlantic salmon, and the Arctic char, that we will not abandon them to extinction. Taking bold action on climate and nature is the best way for the government to demonstrate true global leadership and to do what is right, knowing that in the long run, the cost of inaction is far, far greater than the cost of action. Are we willing today to do what is required in the long term rather than what is expedient in the short term? Are we willing to do not what is politically possible, but what is scientifically necessary to ensure a future for our planet? The choice is ours, and the time is now. Let us be the generation that chose to save our natural world, not the generation that stood by and watched it die. For nature knows no borders. It does not recognise our political divisions. It's time to write a new chapter in our nation's story, one where we finally understand that in saving climate and nature, we save ourselves. I invite my honourable colleagues to look at my young friends in the gallery, look them in the eye, and show them that you are willing